Moadim Simcha, Guten Kvittel. Yesterday we learned the Mishnah on the bottom of Chav Ches Amid Beis, and basically the Mishnah differentiates between a machshava of chutz limkomo as opposed to a machshava of chutz lizmano. In the latter case, it's a full-fledged pigul with an isur. In the former case, that's chutz limkomo, it's pigul, but there's no chiyuv kares. Now, in this Mishnah, we have a list of different parts of the animal. Some are emurim that they'll be makter al gabi mizbeach, and on the list is something called or ha'alya, which is the hide of the tail. And we mentioned yesterday that this is referring to a sheep. And the Gemara says, Savrua or Alya Ke'alya Dami. So we're here on Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph, and we need a Haktor al Gabi Mizbeach of the or of the Alya, like the Alya itself. So the Alya itself is certainly edible, and our Mishnah is maintaining that even the or the hide of the alya, of that part of the body, is also edible, because from a sheep it's edible, as opposed to, let's say, a goat or a parah, an aze or a parah. There the tail is not burnt on the mizbech at all, except for an ol, of course. So the Gemara raises the following question. The Mishnah says that if he had a machshava to, instead of eating the hide of the tail within its time framework, its allowed time or its allotted place, he had a machshava of chutz lizmano, chutz limkomo, and that's going to, at least at the very minimum, in the case of chutz limkomo, will certainly passel the korban. So the Gemara asks the following question: Now again, it's not clear to me why the Gemara asks this question dafka about alya or ha'alya, but in any event, there's a general question here that the Mishnah is difficult, because we're assuming now that there's no machshava from achilas mizbech to adam. So in other words, if you have part of the basar of the korban that's supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach, and he has in mind to eat the korban, which is called achilas adam, then that doesn't register at all. It's not even a relevant machshava, and therefore would not create a psul in the korban. Omer Shmuel Hamani Rabbi Eliezer Hidiyom Machash Mechilus Mizbeach Lechilus Adam Mechilus Adam Lechilus Mizbeach. This Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that if you have something that should be burnt on the Mizbeach, and he has a machshava about Achilas Adam, or vice versa, then it does passel the korban. Tisnana, we learned this way in a Mishnah, which is coming around the bend on Daf Lamed Hey. Hashocheres hazevach. Okay, so now we're going to first study the sheet of the Tanakama. Lechol dover shein darko lechol, or lahaktir dover shein darko lahaktir kosher. The Tanakama shita is that, as we said before, a machshava from something that's edible for haktar mizbeach, or vice versa, it's not even a machshava. It doesn't even register at all, and therefore the korban is still kosher. However, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Posel, he says that even a machshava from Adam to Achilus Mizbeach, or vice versa, is a machshava that registers, and it's a machshava poseles. And therefore, if his intent was to eat the or of the aliyah, the hide of the tail of a sheep, outside its time, outside its place, then it passes the korban, even though these are a murim that should be burnt on the mizbeach. But Mayu Kimtik Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara asks, Amos Seifa. Let's look at the Seifa, and this is printed on the next daf, Chavtes Amid Aleph. Zaklal, Kol Hashochet v'Makav v'Molef Azorik, all four avodos that were done with the machshav of lechol dover shedarko lechol, ulahaktir dover shedarko lahaktir. Then in those cases, the korban is possible because, again, he had a machshav according to the Rabbanon who say from Adam to Adam or from Mizbeach to Mizbeach. So Gemara is now medayik. Dover shedarko lechol in she'ein darko lechol lo ason ki Rabbanon. Obviously, this Mishnah reflects the sheet of the Rabbanon that it would only passel the korban because it was darko lechol, and he had a machshava to eat it outside of its place or its time. However, if it would be something that's not usually eaten, then it doesn't passel the korban. So how could it be now? We just interpreted the Reisha as attributable to Rabbi Eliezer, and now the Sefer is the Rabbanon? Can we break up the integrity of the Mishnah? And once again, the reason why we were forced to interpret the Reisha like Rabbi Eliezer is because in the case of Aliyah, of Or Aliyah, presumably it should reach the Mizbeach, and his machshava was to eat it, Achilas Adam, outside of its time framework. Omole, Shmuel responds to this question I don't have a problem. I could tolerate splitting up the Mishnah in a way that the Reisha reflects Rabbi Eliezer and the Sefer Rabbanan. However, of Huna Omar, I could offer, says Rav Huna, an alternative interpretation, and that is that Ora Alya Lavka Alya Domi. That means the Or Ha'alya is not considered a murim that is burnt on the Mizbeach, and this is based on a drosha that even in the case of sheep, where the tail itself is burnt on the Mizbeach, but not the R of the Aliyah. That's not burnt. And again, that's based on a pasuk. There's no logical reason for that, because if we're saying it's edible to human beings, then how could it be that it's not burnt on the Mizbeach? The reason it's not burnt on the Mizbeach would apparently be because it's not edible, but yet we're saying that he could eat it. In any event, our Mishnah apostles any korban that he intended to eat the Or Ha'aliyah outside its place or beyond its time, and it's possible, that could follow and be attributable even to the Rabbanon. Why? Because the Or Ha'aliyah, says Rav Huna, is not going to be burnt on the Mizbeach. Amar Rava, my time of the Rav Huna, where do we know, is there a source to support Rav Huna's premise that although the aliyah, the tail, is burnt on the Mizbeach, but the Or Ha'aliyah is not? And the answer is Chelbo Ha'aliyah. So the Torah says Ha'aliyah with a Hey Ayidiyah, and that Hey is separating the Aliyah from the Or Ha'aliyah. Maybe we should read the whole pasuk. Vehikriv This Vayikri Gimel. V'hikriv mizevach hashlomim isha Hashem l'Hashem chelbo ha'alya tmima. Okay. Rav Chizda Amar, he has another pshat in the Mishnah. The olam or alya ka'alya dami. Yes, we will burn the or ha'alya like the alya on the mizbeach. We're holding now, according to the Chachamim Shita, that ain't mechashve me'achilas mizbeach achilas adam. So why is the carbon apostle? Hachamayas kinon. The Mishnah is referring to a case not of sheep, but be'alya shel gedi. It is the tail of a gedi, or perhaps a sa'ir, and that's not going to be burnt on the mizbeach because that's not considered something that's readily edible, although it is humanly edible. So now the Gemara is going to analyze the three answers that we have. We have Shmuel, we have Rav Huna, and now we have Rav Chizda. Why is each one unwilling to interpret the Mishnah like the others? So where it says the following: Kula kishmulo amri. Whether it's Rav Huna or Rav Chizda, they refuse to accept Shmuel's pshat that a Mishnah reflects Rabbi Eliezer because Reish Rabbi Eliezer was Sefer Rabbanon lo mukmi. We don't want to interpret the Mishnah and split it up such that the Reish is Rabbi Eliezer and the Sefer is Rabbanon. Oh, but now we have to look for the whole, so to speak, in the other shitas, in Rav Huna, in Rav Chizda. Ki Rav Huna lo amri. Why did they want to say, like Rav Huna, that the Ar Ha'alya, as opposed to the Alya, is not burnt on the Mizbeach? And the answer is because they hold Ar Alya Ka'alya Dami. The hide of the tail is the same as the tail itself. Kamash Malahu, and therefore they need the Chiddush of Rav Huna to disagree with them. Rav Chizda, my time alone. Why do Shmuel and Rav Huna reject Rav Chizda? What's the hole in the sheet of Rav Chizda? And the Gemara answers, my time alone, because they think that the Mishnah is not telling me any Chiddush. Or Alya Ka'alya Dami. You're just telling me that in the case of a goat, the hide of the tail is like the tail itself, and therefore it's burnt on the mizbeach. One second, sorry. So let's see. Tanina. We have it in a Mishnah, and apparently this Mishnah is in Masechta Chulin. V'elu she'orosein kibsara. Right, where you eat the basar of something that's also you get malchus, and if you eat the ar of the basar, the hide of that meat, and the Mishnah in Chulin gives you a list of that where the hide is edible, or shetachas ha'alya. Now, how do we know this is referring to a goat? So again, what do we get out of this Mishnah in Chulin? That it's clear that the hide of the tail has the status of basar, which means therefore it's burnt on the mizbeach. So we already have a Mishnah in Chulin. Why would our Mishnah repeat what we already know, according to Rav Chizda's pshat, from the Mishnah in Chulin? Rav Chizda Itzrich. Rav Chizda has to defend himself on why we need our Mishnah once we have the Mishnah in Chulin. Salke daitach hamina, I would have thought had to be linyan tuma. when the Mishnah in Chulin upgrades the status of Or Shetachas Alya to Alya, that's only as far as Kabbalah's Tum is concerned. The meat of an Avela conveys Tumah. The hide does not convey Tumah. Certain hides are soft and edible, are considered part of the meat of the Nevela, and therefore they are Makabal Tumah. And one of the soft, hairless hide is on the underside of the tail. So we might think that as far as Tumah is concerned, the status of Or Ha'alya, based on the Mishnah, is upgraded to that of Basar. And if it's Basar Nevela, then it's Makabal Tumah. The Rachich Mitztarif. Why is it that the hide of the tail is integrated into the basar of the nevela, and it generates tumah? That's because it's rachich. It is soft and edible. Aval hacha, but here, what do we put on the mizbeach? Just anything that's basar? Oh no. L'mashcha l'gdula. Right, the Torah says in Bamidbar, Perek Yud Ches, with regard to Truma, Vaydaber Hashem al Aaron, Vani hinei nosati l'cha es mishmeres Trumosai l'chol kodshei b'nei Yisrael l'cha nesativ l'moshcha u'levanecha l'chol kol. So l'moshcha is l'gdula. B'derech kederech shamalachim ochlim. In other words, the mizbeach should be fed for consumption, that which would be fed on the table of the kings. But malachim don't eat the hide of a tail. Therefore, in my havmin, I would say that with regard to hakrav al gabi mizbeach, you need ligdula, and in that sense, the aliyah does not have the same status as basar, and therefore any machshava of chutzes man or chutzes mikol would not passel the karma, because we're not talking about basar. We're not talking about something that would be burnt on the mizbeach. Kamash malon, and Mishnah has to teach us, therefore, that even with regard to achilas mizbeach, the aliyah and the or of the aliyah is considered basar, and therefore it's nikrav al gabi mizbeach, and therefore the machshava here would be, I guess it depends on Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Right, according to Chachamim, it would not be possible. Okay, as here's Fasemes. Fasemes says that the machshava of chutzes man or chutzim kom with regard to the or ha'aliyah would passel the korban. Just 1 second. Why would it passel the korban? Now, as in the Havmini, we were saying that it would not be considered part of the Evarim Faktora because of Limashcha Ligdula. But now the Kamashmalin is that it is Bechol Zot edible. Most people would eat it, and therefore it doesn't undermine the requirement of Limashcha Ligdula. Hence, it would be consumed on the Mizbeach. Just 1 second. Consumed on the Mizbeach. So if I understand correctly, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, that when is the machshava poselis, when does it invalidate the carbon? That's if it could be brought on the mizbeach, and therefore it has the status of hekter evar. So until this point, we're assuming that because of the halacha of mashcha l'gdula, the hide of the tail would not be subject to haktar gam mizbeach, and therefore the machshava is completely out of the league, out of the radar screen. It would not create a psul in the korban. But now Kamash Malan, that no, it's still considered edible, and it's still within the purview of Lamashchal Gedula. Hence, it's something that goes on the Mizbeach. Hence, his machshava would be a machshava poselis. Meisvei Gemara Yasakash on Rav Chizda Hashochet Esa Ola Lahaktir Kizayis Me'or Shetachas Al Yechutzim Komo Posel V'Yembo Koris Chutzis Mano Psulim Pigul V'Chayoven Ala Koris. Okay, so far just a repetition of our Mishnah, but now the Brisa records the dissenting view of Elazar ben Yehudish. So a whole bunch of names here. Shimon, Echad or base haprosos behema. Right, prosos are the hooves of the animal, and the hide, the or of the hooves of the animals. Again, we're talking about behema daka here, small animals. The echad or harosh shel egel harach, the or, the hide of the rush of the head of a tender young calf. Echad or shtachas ha'aliyah. V'chol shemonu chacham gabi tuma v'elu she'orosei kibsaron. Lahavi or shall base haboshes. Okay, that has to do with the genitals of the female animal. Chutzim komo posei b'koris chutzimano pigul v'chayv levikoris. Now, the introduction to this brisa was Hashocheres ha'olah. So the Gemara is medayik. Ola in avol zevach lo, other karbanos, it's inapplicable. There would be no psul in the karban. And why is that? Because apparently the ora ali is not considered basar. It's not edible. It would not go up on the mizbeah. Bishleim Rav Huna, or a corner of Huna, who holds that the or of the aliyah is the same as the aliyah. Just 1 second. So let's go back to Rav Huna once more. Rav Huna was the one who said that or al yolav ka al yadami. Right. In other words, since again, since according to Afuna, or al yolav ka al yadami, and that's going to be derived from a pasuk chelbo ha'alya. So we don't burn the or al yalga mizbeach, but it's royal achilas adam, and therefore, if he had the wrong kavana vis-a-vis the human consumption of the hide of the tail, which is manachus and then even the Rabbana would agree that the carbon is possible. Right, because his machshav of chutz l'zman chutz l'mkom was meaningful because in Achinami it's edible. And why isn't it brought on the Mizbeach? That's based on Xeris HaKosuv of Chelbo HaAlya v'lo Or HaAlya. So therefore, Hainu Diktani Ola. Only in the case of an Ola, which is Kuloi Kolil, do we bring the Or HaAlya onto the Mizbeach. Otherwise, we derive from the Pasuk that Or HaAlya is not brought on the Mizbeach. Rav Chizda holds that no, the Ora Alya is burnt on the Mizbeach. It's Kal Yadami, my Tani Ola, Lisnei Zevach. According to Rav Chizda, Shlomim, Chatos, sheep, the Ora Alya is burnt upon the Mizbeach. Therefore, the Brisa should have stated that if the Kohen had the intention of burning the Ora Alya of any sheep other than an Ola, I'm sorry, not only an Ola, then it would passel the carbon. Rav Chizda defends himself, says, boys, Ema. I'll give you one answer, be Al Yishal Gedi. And the Al Yishal Gedi, I admit, is not burnt on the Mizbeach because it's not soft and edible. and therefore the machshava would not be a machshava aposteles. So if he had an intention to burn the Ora Aliyah Chutzim Kol Chutzmana would not passel the carbon, only in the case of an Ola. Amalacharav Chizda, Ibois Ema Bi'al Shal Gdi, Ibois Ema Tni Zevach. Instead of Ola, read it as Zevach. Passel the Aimbo Kores, right, with the Machshava of Achila Chutzim Kol Chutzmano, Minani Mili. So here's a discussion from whence do we know that chutzim mana chutzim kol passes a carbon and generates kares for someone who eats the meat. For the case of chutzim komo, although it generates a psul in the carbon like pigul, but nevertheless there's no kares if you eat it. And the answer is trei kroi ksive. Apparently there's a contradiction between two psukim. I.e., what is this contradiction? Omar Rava Shlishi. So let's read the pasuk. V'im he'achol yachel mipsar zevach shalom v'yom hashlishi lo yirotze. Zel chutzes mano, and the Torah says pigul year. A nefesh ochelos mimenu avona tisa. So we're chopping up this pasuk into two parts. So the first part of the pasuk says, "V'im heyochi yocham mipsar zevach shalom b'yom hashlishi," and we're going to attach that to the end of the pasuk that says, "Hanefesh ochelos menu avona tisa," and that's going to be chutzes mano. But then in the middle of the pasuk it says pigul, zel chutzim koma. Hanefesh ochelos mimenu. Echad v'lo shnayim. It says mimenu. Zel chutzes mano l'mute chutzim koma. So why did the Torah add the word mimenu, v'hanefesh ochelos mimenu, to say that that only goes on the case of Yom HaShlishi, but not on the case of Pigul, which is Chutz L'Mkomo. The aim of HaNefesh HaNochelos Mimenu Zeh Chutz L'Mkomo L'Mu'utei Chutz Zmano. I mean, how do you know which one is being excluded, which one is being included? And Gemara answers, there'll be a few answers, I think. Mistabra Chutzim Zmano Odif de Posach Bey, right? First, let's start with Yom HaShlishi at the beginning of the Posach. That's Chutzim Zmano. That's more of a severe violation. In fact, the Gemara Adarabba Chutzim Koma Odif Dissamachle. Right, the word Pigul Yeh is coming right there before Hanefesh Hamon Tisa. Elomar Bai, we're going to have to find a different answer. Kiyasa than the Dimam Rab. Somech Atana Aditani Tana. Kshu Omer Shlishi Beparshas Kedoshim Tiyu. She'ein Talmud Lomar, meaning Ein Talmud Lomar means why is it necessary? V'im Hari Nebar Akvar Nebar. In Parshat Tzav it already says V'im Hayachol Yechel Mipsar Zevach Shlom of Yom HaShlishi. So why do I need the Parsha in Kedoshim? I already have it in Parshas Tzav. And now we're going to apply Im Eino Inyan.